Mars Bluff, a quiet rural community in eastern Florence County, South Carolina, was jolted onto the Cold War headlines by an historic explosion March 11, 1958. On that day, a B-47E bomber, manned by United States Air Force Captains Kohler, Woodruff, and Kulka, was ascending across the area on its way to England, carrying an atomic bomb. Suddenly, a bomb rack problem and the 7,600-pound TNT part of the weapon plunged down onto the farmscape below. The bomb detonated on impact, blew a 70 by 35-foot crater, destroyed the home of Walter Gregg, injured his family, damaged Mizpah Baptist Church, and cracked walls in a 5-mile radius. The atomic core stayed on the plane. No one was killed.
What started to be a normal day ended up pretty scary.
Well, it felt honestly like the house raised up off the foundation.
Doors had blown open, the locks were torn off.
I thought the airplane had failed.
It was kind of frightening.
We heard the loud noise, cans started falling off the shelves.
You was afraid to death because you didn't know the bomb falling that close here.
It made you realize that it could have been disastrous.
The term for this type of incident is broken arrow. During the tense years of the Cold War between the USSR and Western civilization, an accident happened on this site right here that is very unusual. B-47 was coming from Hunter Air Force Base, which is near Savannah, and going over on a combined practice run and an actual live bombing possibility against the USSR run. Well, anyway, as they came over from Georgia up across South Carolina, the pilot was pushing the mechanism saying, put that pin back in there, the safety pin, that would keep the bomb drop pin from going. And of course the dial was saying, it's not in there, it's not in there. So he ordered the bombardier, who sits right in the nose of the B-47, which is not much bigger than a cubicle in an office, and he sits in there for 14 hours and he can't see out either, and he's the guy that reads all the instruments and actually sets the bomb off when it goes and all that. He asked him to go back and manually put that pin in there, see if he could do that. So they had to depressurize the plane, so they all had to put on oxygen. So he gets up and goes by this little narrow passage by the pilot and the co-pilot and goes back through the little compartment, and it's too small for him to wear his parachute and get through there. And so he has to take that off, and he's got the oxygen mask, and that's all he has with him. And he crawls back down through the plane, and by this time it's cold and depressurized, and he gets to the bomb, and here's this big bomb. You stand by like this on him, and he's trying to find the pin to see if he can put it back in place, and he can't find the pin. And he's jumping up and down looking, where's the pin? And then he realizes it's on the other side of the bomb. So he well, that's where it is. I got to get up, and the bomb's round and smooth, basically, nothing to hold on to. And there's not a whole lot of room to jump or climb either inside this. So he apparently reached up and grabbed something to lift himself up like that, and that was the thing that set the deal loose. Set the, not the locking pin, but the regular bomb thing. He boom, pulled that out, and the bomb rolls out onto the bomb bay doors. Now they're not strong, they're streamlined, but not for weight bearing. So here's this big bomb rolls down on these doors with him on top of it. Now he's laying there on top of this big bomb, and the thing's creaking, getting ready to go. So he grabs hold of something, and just when he did, the bomb drops out. So he's hanging on to this thing, got 400-mile-an-hour wind whipping through here, cold, and he's hanging on for dear life. Then about that time, they go, wham! So he manages to pull himself back up in there and catch his breath, I suppose, settle down a little bit, and he works his way back up through the plane, through the fuselage of the plane. And of course, they're maneuvering around to see what happened and what it looked like, take some reconnaissance photos of the big cloud of black smoke coming up. And he comes right up behind the co-pilot, here's the pilot and the co-pilot, and he comes right up behind him, and leans forward because it's noisy. And we lost the bomb. And it shocked the co-pilot. They thought he was gone, man. Wow! And anyway, they got him in there, closed it up, pressurized it, took some photos. The explosive trigger for the nuclear device fell right here and blasted this crater, which was at the time 70 feet, about 35 feet deep.
We're here today with the Walter Gregg family. It was Walter Gregg's home that the bomb fell into his backyard. Mr. Gregg, could you tell us what you were doing about that time of day?
It was around a little after 4 o'clock, kind of windy, cool day. And my son and myself was in my little workshop garage, piddling around, doing nothing special. Actually, we thought it was another smaller plane from Shaw Field that came over approximately the same time the bomb dropped.
Oh.
And I thought that was a small plane that crashed just behind our yard. And we looked and saw smoke and dirt and mud, everything falling from the air. So we said, well, I told Walter, if that pilot's going down there, no use to even look because he'll be dead. When we first went out, the whole yard was full of smoke and dust and dirt. It's still falling. And then the girls were over in the left side of the yard. They had a little playhouse. And the cook, she had gone over to see them also. But I saw all of them running around and playing, and the electric wire, it was swinging back and forth about like a swing. And I hollered to the girl, stay still, don't move, y'all stay one place. Then we had a 300-gallon LP tank, gas tank, heat and everything with it. And as I went by, I cut it off. I didn't know what was loose in the house or anything, but the house looked mighty bad with dirt, big holes in it, which mud and stuff from the hole that going up in there and come back down on top of the house and knocked holes all through it. And then I ran on in the house to see about my wife. She was in there holding her head, and blood was running down arm on the elbow, dripping on the floor. And I stayed there a few minutes, and then I went back out to check on the children again, and that's about starting off with the whole thing just a few minutes after it actually happened.
We were over in the left. There was Ella, my cousin, and Helen, my sister, and I was over there. Everything was fine. And then I remember having to get up off the ground. I had been knocked on the ground, and there was it was mud that was just pelting down on top of us.
We spent the night at Dr. Mead's house here in Florence, MD, and we went back out there the next morning, and they wouldn't even let us get into the house. The Air Force from Myrtle Beach was guarding it, and they wouldn't let anybody or call anybody to let us get back in.
Sometimes I felt like, oh, it's impossible. You all can't make it again. But then again, I say, yes, you can. And I tell you, I think what was such a wonderful thing, the people of Florence, we wouldn't have made it without them. They couldn't have been any better. So when you have people like that working with you, you can make it.
Where were you on March 11th, 1958?
In Ludwigsburg, Germany.
Oh my. Do you remember the bomb incident back home in Mars Bluff?
I sure do. I picked up the paper one morning. It was the U.S. Army Times, and it says, a bomb falls on Mars Bluff.
I was riding with my friend Guy Moore going to Florence for some reason, I can't remember what. We'd come home from school. We came up Francis Marion Road to the intersection, which was old 301 then, turned left to go to Florence. Probably a couple of 100 feet after we got straightened out going towards Florence, the car felt like it just jumped to the left. I didn't hear anything, but looked back over my shoulder, and when we cleared the trees and everything, the mushroom cloud was going straight up.
During that time, I was around between 9 and 10 years old, and I remember me and some more siblings was outside playing, and when it fell, you know, the window panes were shaking in the house, and we really didn't know what was going on because our parents was out working, and we found out later that the bomb fell.
My mother, my father, and myself were standing in the kitchen, and all of a sudden we hear that, well, it felt honestly like the house raised up off the foundation. And a couple of windows broke, and you know, you could just, it was obvious to see it was plaster, and, you know, cracked on the wall and everything, and the commode cracked. And of course, my daddy, at that time, he had a lot of jet planes breaking the sound barrier, and that's the first thing he really thought. He said, "Boy, that's an unusual loud sound barrier breaking." So he probably said a few choice words about the Air Force and went on back to work, and he was plowing right close to Ford Road on a tractor. And this was probably after about 30 minutes after the actual bomb had dropped, and somebody stopped on the highway and said, "Did you hear about the bomb falling on your brother's land?" And he said no, so he came back to the house and got my mother and myself, and you couldn't go on Ford Road, it was blocked off, so we went through the back way, some back roads, and got to the site, you know. And then of course he started inquiring about his brother and the children and everything.
Tell us a little bit about what you have in this box here.
Okay, well, I'll go back to when the bomb actually fell. Of course, the children, we went up there and started looking around, and of course, the civil defense was there, and the EMP, of course, we were little, and he had a big pistol, and he said, "Now, if you find anything, turn it off, turn it back." Which I did find several more pieces. I do remember finding one piece that had several wires to hook to it, and I turned it back. But this particular piece here, we farmed some land adjacent to where the bomb crater is, and I used to ride the track with my father all the time. And we found 2 or 3 pieces like this. Of course, we knew what it was.
In your fields?
In the fields. And this was probably, I'd say 300 or 400 yards away from the actual crater where these pieces were found. And I said, well, I'm just going to get a couple of them and keep them. And for 40-something years, it stayed in my, a drawer at the house.
When I pulled up, probably I was 50 yards away from the house, and the ground was covered with mud, looked like speckles of mud, just like if you run vehicles through a mud puddle and it splashes out and hits the ground. It was really odd looking the way it was such a big area, a mud puddle, you just see a little bit of it there, but the whole yard was...
Did they ask you to take them to the hospital? Did you determine they needed to go?
I don't remember whether I offered, I'm pretty sure I must have offered, they asked one, but a couple of them were bleeding, and I figured they needed
medical attention. So you left Russell behind, and you carried them to the old Florence McLeod Hospital?
Yes. I'm glad now that we are able to have a full understanding, and what it could have been, because if it would have been a fully, if it would have been fully energized, it could have been a lot devastating. Maybe the Florence, we wouldn't know Florence as it is now.
I think my direct experience came a couple of years ago when a writer was in the area doing an article for Esquire. He contacted me because he'd met Mr. Clyde Gregg, I believe, who had a fragment, and the author of the article was, with his little handheld radiation detector, was finding that this fragment was giving him some counts, so that perhaps the fragment was radioactive. We did some what's called gamma ray spectroscopy with the bomb fragment, and in fact did see that it was radioactive, and determined that the source of that radioactivity was uranium, which of course at first glance might excite folks because you're thinking, well, atomic bomb, uranium
Yes.
being a source of fuel, if you will, in that nuclear weapon. But this uranium was in fact of a characteristic of natural uranium, so the type of uranium that we find in the soil. Okay, and uranium is a natural radionuclide. It's been around as long as the Earth's been around, and it's in the ground, it's in rock. Whereas weapons grade material would have appeared very different on our spectroscopy system. So we knew we didn't have weapons grade uranium, that what we had was natural or comparable to natural levels of uranium. And it turns out that weapon design had what they called a tamper. That is, the outer casing of the bomb was used depleted or natural uranium as a surrounding casing, just structurally. Didn't contribute, wasn't meant to contribute specifically to the yield of the atomic weapon, but rather served a structural purpose. Well, that then made a lot of sense, right?
Yes.
That if that was on the exterior of the weapon that fell, of course we knew that the actual fission part of the weapon wasn't in the bomb when it fell, but it remained on the plane. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, this tamper would have been part of that device that fell, and so the fragments could have natural or depleted levels of uranium in them, and that seems to be consistent with what we saw with Mr. Gregg's piece.
So his fragment is safe, so to speak.
Oh, it's absolutely safe. I haven't done it myself, but the founder of our department, who's since passed on, Dr. Skip Hendrick, I know that he, I believe in the early 80s, mid 80s, took students from our health physics program out to that crater site and did some soil sampling out there just to see if there was any sort of residual activity. And their analysis, my understanding is that they didn't find anything, which is what I would expect as well. This is an opportunity to perhaps try to address some of those misconceptions and alleviate unnecessary fears if they exist, and that kind of a thing. So that's my interest.
You have been listening to different eyewitnesses and hear witnesses for people that were around in 1958 to actually witness this bomb exploding in Morris Bluff, South Carolina. We hope we have provided an educational view of what went on, and we hope we all can take something away from it and learn from it, from the courage of Miss Effie Gregg and Walter Gregg, their children. I think I've enjoyed most her point of view with it. It's very different, but it's also important to know that these two people literally lost everything and started over. And I have personally witnessed the camaraderie and the spirit of the people in coming together and making this thing and wanting to preserve this site. And I thank you for your time.